Cieľom tejto konferencie je reagovať na aktuálnu situáciu, ktorá je nielen na Slovensku, ale aj v Európe. Príliv utečencov a reakcia teda obzvlášť slovenských politikov a slovenskej spoločnosti na túto situáciu. Chceli by sme prispieť k rozvíjaniu diskusie o tejto téme, prinášanie ďalších pohľadov, iných argumentov, iných uhlov pohľadu na to, akým spôsobom je možné reagovať na príchod a potrebu utečencov v Európe. A ja poprosím pani Raneving z Kofenland, chargé d'affaires veľvyslanectva Norského kráľovstva, aby predstavila našich hostí. Nech sa páči.
I want to thank you very much for the invitation to this conference on a very important topic. From our side, from the Norway and the Norwegian embassy side, we are very glad that our NGO funds is used under the EA Norway grants to fund such important events. The rise of extremism and how to counter this phenomena is important to understand. And we have to put the right measures into place to fight it. The different elements of extremism, like intolerance, hatred, and absolute worldviews, must be challenged in such a way that radical and extreme environments lose their appeal and support. And the role of active citizens in this fight is so important. I'm very glad to see so many here today also. And also it's a great pleasure for me to introduce two guests from Norway who will share their knowledge and expertise with us this morning. We have Mr. Tom Olsen. He was himself a neo-Nazi in the 1990s, and he has a valuable inside perspective, and now he is one of the most important experts on the issue, working against radicalization and violent extremism in Norway and internationally. Also in his thesis for his master degree, he was discussing the processes of joining and exiting these groups. So he has a lot of knowledge about what kind of prevention, especially efforts, are the most efficient. And this will be very useful for all of us to learn more about today. And we have Mr. Bjørn Ihler. He is an activist, writer, and filmmaker. You have been working against racism, hatred, and violent extremism for a long time. You are a survivor of the terrible attack on Utoya you all know about. It happened 22nd of July 2011. It was a horrific event. It shocked all of us, and it's affected all of us in Norway to a large extent, and also many others. However, political activism and work against violence and extremism have been one of your core interests for a long time. And he believes that to use art, theater and film for awareness raising and to reach people at a deeper level is important tools to communicate political ideas and to prevent violence and hatred. So with this, I wish you a very good conference. I'm looking forward to listening to all of you. And I want to thank you again.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We will start with Tom's presentation.
I'll present myself. My name is Tom Olsen. I'm from Norway. As introduced, I do different kind of work. I work in Norway as a SLT coordinator, which means crime prevention coordinator. And most municipalities in Norway do have an SLT coordinator. And the SLT coordinator's job is, of course, to help assist the local authorities and make sure that the cooperation between the police and the local authorities works perfectly. And as I mentioned, I work as an SLT coordinator in the municipality of Time, which is roughly 15 minutes away from me. It's on the west coast of Norway, as you can see on the map. It's 11,000 people, I think, living there, locally we do not have an extremist problem. And this is a little bit of a presentation of who I was and who I am. And I'll try to be quite short on that part because I only got like 20 minutes to introduce myself. But the important thing is that even though I used to be a neo-Nazi, you are not born a neo-Nazi. Hate is something you learn, and hate is something that you can unlearn. I had my experiences, and usually you have various factors. We call them farefaktorer. That means factors of danger in your life, and it might be that your mother is an alcoholic, or that you don't have a father, or you have a father, of course, but he left maybe the family when you were young, so you never really had a relationship to your father. Or it might be other social factors that plays in. It's numerous. You know this from all kind of prevention work that you do from daycare centers and up to adulthood. In my case, when I'm introduced by a professor at the police academy who I work closely with, his name is Bjørn. He always says that there is a rule and then you have the exception. And usually in every way he talk about me as the exception. And the exception is that in my life I didn't have any of these factors. I came from a stable family, a good family, caring mom and dad. So it was other reasons why I joined the neo-Nazi scene. And in the neo-Nazi scene, I also became a leader. And I stayed in the neo-Nazi movement for roughly 8 years. And of course, as a neo-Nazi, I did a bit of research, if you can call it that. Because we are talking about who are joining the neo-Nazi movement, and we are talking about why. And we are talking about how to get people to leave the neo-Nazi scene. And of course, as I was a neo-Nazi leader, I wanted to know the same. I wanted to know how do you get people to join, and how do you get them to stay there, and how do you prevent them from leaving? Because I wanted people in, I didn't want them out. So research today, it shows, and I will exemplify this a little bit with my own story also, and you have to cut me off when the time is right.
This will be very difficult.
Yeah, I know, because I just keep on talking. But we know who joins these movements, at least in Norway, and I think that in some point of view we can transfer this knowledge from us to you. First of all, of course, if we speak about immigration, we have had quite a few big periods in Norwegian history where we ourselves had a lot of refugees coming to our country. So we faced the same issues as you do today. If you go back, Pinochet came to power in Chile. And I think, and the numbers is a bit, but still, I think roughly 30,000 people came from Chile to Norway. And of course, you had the same issues then. People were, how are Chilean people? I've never met anybody from Chile. How are they? Will they rape somebody? Are they criminals? You know, no. The people who came from Chile, you know, today they are still in Norway, but they are integrated in Norway and the Norwegian society. They are doctors, they are nurses, they are teachers, they are, well, probably some are unemployed like anybody would be in a society, but most people are fairly integrated in a society, and I've never heard anything after the immigration started when the refugees came that there has been any, negative experiences with that. And I think that's quite important to know. Also, in the 90s, when I became a neo-Nazi, you had a lot of immigration from Bosnia, and this is Muslim people. And of course, there were some people, like myself, who said, oh no, we can't have this kind of people here. They will rape our children and they will do all these horrible things. Of course, when you look back at it today, Bosnian people are the same people as me and you. And they want a job, they want social security for their children and themselves. They want to live peaceful lives. There is nothing with the ethnicity or with people that they behave in any different way than me and you do. So, of course, when you meet the Bosnian people today in Norway, they are highly integrated. And I believe the same will be with the Syrian refugees. I can't see that there should be any difference there. They are educated. They come from a society which are highly educated, and the individuals who come to Norway or to Slovakia or any country, they are not here to do anything wrong. They just want to live their lives in a safe environment, and they want their children to grow up in a safe environment. So I think that in any way we as Norwegians can share our experiences with you guys and with your population. I think it's important to get these stories out. And also, I will focus a little bit of this at the end when it comes to my own story, why I chose to exit the neo-Nazi movement. But first, I would like to tell you the whole story about why I joined, but I don't have the time for it. But I will use a few of these slides to illustrate or to explain my master's thesis, which is one of the reasons why I have the job I have today. My master thesis made the headlines, of course, because at the time you have had Andersa Breivika doing his horrific act of terror. And we recognized that the past 10 years, nobody had been looking at the right-wing scene. So my research with my master thesis was the only research that had been done in Norway for a decade. I focused on two things: why people join and why people exit. For me, this was the important issues to figure out, because we know in Norway at least, and I'm quite sure that some of our experiences can be transferred, because Tore Bjørgo at the Police Academy, he has been doing serious research in Sri Lanka, in Ireland, in America, and he's cooperating with the researchers all over the world, and he has been kind enough to share his network of expertise with me during my master thesis. And in Norway, people who drop out from high school, if you look at those people, roughly 50% drop out because of drug use. That's the national average. In my hometown or my municipality, it's higher than the average, but it's because you have a lot of positions where you as an uneducated man can come in and you can get a job, and because that's the possibilities in my municipality. But on a national level, when people drop out, it's usually because of drugs. But that's only 50%. Then you got the other 50%, and you can look at the people who have been sexually molested during their years as a youngster, and that's roughly 10%, research show. And then you have got another 20% who have experienced violence in their home, like daddy hitting mommy or daddy hitting mommy and the children. And all these people you find in the percentage of people who drop out from school. And if you look at the people who has gone to Syria, and I'm talking about both ethnic Norwegians who has converted to Islam, or I'm talking about people who are first or generation immigrants who also go to Syria. And in Norway we have over 400 municipalities, and it's probably roughly around 100 who has gone to Syria. So it's not that many people in number. But when you look at the people that we know that has left for Syria, we know that roughly 60% of them are dropouts. And out of the whole population of youth, we know that 2% drop out from school. So we know where to focus our resources. We know who, not in every case, because myself, I'm an exception. I did my high school, but most people in these groups are dropouts, both in the neo-Nazi movement. If you look at the motorcycle criminal gangs like Hells Angels and Bandidos, you find the same thing. And if you look at the jihadists in Norway who leave, it's the same story. Now, if you look at Britain, it's a different story. 60% of the people in jail that are jihadists, they have a university diploma. So it's differences between the countries too. And I'm sure we will find differences here in Slovakia too. So you can't compare a nation with another automatically, but there are, of course, certain things that will be similar. And if I may say so, there is two findings in my master thesis that I would like to focus on if I have the time still. Number one is, as I mentioned, as you could read on the main page, the importance of social relations. I've never met one single neo-Nazi who was a Nazi when he joined the neo-Nazi movement. They all joined the neo-Nazi movement for other reasons. And it seems like the main reason is social reasons. You grow up, but you don't have a father figure. So what do? No, many people grow up without a father figure. But again, like the 2% of dropouts, we know who the neo-Nazis are, even though there are local differences, like in Kristiansand, a city down south in Norway. Most of the people who joined the neo-Nazi movement in the 90s had a connection with the Children Protective Services. While in Brumunddal, at the east side of Norway, you had the main factory going bankrupt and a lot of unemployment, and you had the sons and daughters of the working man there joining the neo-Nazi movement. So the motivations for joining was different from the different parts of the country in Norway. And I'm quite sure that if you do research here in Slovakia, you will find local differences too. Because you find that anywhere, actually, when you do the research, that there are different motivations why people join extremist groups. And if you look at the jihadists in Norway and in Britain and in France, where they have done quite a bit of research, even though it's still not, you can't say that this is how it is, because we don't have enough people to do research on. But what they figure out is that the one thing that, even though, as I mentioned, 60% of the inmates who are jihadists in Britain has a university diploma, it's not like that in Norway. Here, most are dropouts from high school. So they are very different. But what we do know, and what is a common thread, is the fact that they never felt a part of society. If you talk to the people who, in Norway, it's roughly 20 people who has returned from Syria by now. It's also another 20 persons who has been killed in Syria in battle. And then you got another 60 who are still down there. We don't know if they are alive or dead. But they all say the same thing. When you look at the police record, when they interview them, some they only manage to reach at the airport just before they leave. Or you can look at the neo-Nazis, or you can look at the motorcycle criminals. They all say the same thing, that they never felt a part of society. So I think that when you get refugees to a country, the main focus has to be on integration. You have to make people feel welcome. And in my municipality, when we get a new refugee, the coordinator for integration will go to the local community in my municipality, and they will say to the neighbors, you will have a new neighbor in 2 weeks. He comes, the man is a teacher, the woman used to be a nurse, they have children, and they are 5 and 10, they will be at the daycare center, and they will be at your local high school. And they introduce the refugees by person and picture and history before they move into the neighborhood. So, and they ask the locals to care for them and to accept the fact that these people are coming. And most Norwegians do. You know, most Norwegians, when they get the knock on the door and somebody's explaining to them that you are getting a family from Syria next door, most Norwegians will accept that. And even if you are skeptical, it helps a lot when you are being introduced to the people before they arrive. You know that there will be children, you know that there will be a mom and dad, and you get to know that they want to integrate in society. So I think that's a very good way to integrate people. And of course, we focus on language. It's impossible for an immigrant in Norway to succeed in the Norwegian society if they can't speak Norwegian. Wow, okay. I'll jump to the next phase then. My own story, when it comes to exiting, it was social relations too. And as I tell this tale, I want to show you this quote. And it's important for me to stress that the PowerPoint here, if anybody wants it, I'm sure that you can facilitate and email this to everybody. Of course, in Norway, we do have our experience, and whatever we do not have experience with, we do have researchers who has been focusing on this matter for a long time. So we should be able to assist you in various ways. When it comes to myself, when I was a neo-Nazi, I got out of jail and I went to South Africa because I both have friends and family in South Africa. And Mandela was president in South Africa. And at the neo-Nazi right-wing extremism scene in South Africa, they all thought that it would be the same story as in other African countries where the whites experienced a lot of attacks. So in South Africa, the right-wing extremists, they made a call to extremists all over the world, asking them to come to South Africa to help protect the whites of South Africa. So I was among the ones who jumped on the plane and flew down to South Africa, and I met my friends there, and I was told that I would be a farm guard at a farm for some white civilians up at the border to Zimbabwe. So that was to be my station in South Africa. Now, I had a few other experiences, and that's the whole social experience, the meeting with people, because the right-wingers in South Africa, you can't really compare them to right-wingers in Europe. During the apartheid era, they would cooperate with Israel. They would give diamonds to Israel, and Israel would give guns and gasoline from Shell to the apartheid regime of South Africa. So the right-wingers in South Africa, they had a sympathetic view on the Jews, while I, as a neo-Nazi, I hated the Jews. And of course, when I came down there, they pulled a gun at me and they said, "You do not," and I mean it literally. The one colonel in the AVB, he pulled a gun in my head and he told me, "You do not insult the chosen people of God." And he pointed that gun at me and he was drunk. And I was, oh, Jesus Christ, you know, I thought my last minute was there, but he didn't shoot me, luckily. So I was a bit confused because they called me the Uitlander because I couldn't speak Afrikaans and they refused to speak English with me. So being a Norwegian in South Africa, I felt like a foreigner, you know, and they called me just Uitlander like we do in Norway with the right-wingers. They call them utlending, outlander, you know. So it was the same thing, actually. And so I was confused. I did not feel welcome. I didn't want to go to a farm north in South Africa and give my life for a family I didn't know. And I've heard stories about farm guards who were shot by criminals and who were not treated right by their white host families. So I didn't want to be a farm guard. So I went to Johannesburg, and
You should finish this story.
Okay,
this
thank you. And two things happened, which I think is very important also to your kids. If you have a 17-year-old who joins the neo-Nazi movement, it's very important to know that you can't generalize. People like me and you, or people with another skin color, they are just like us, you know, they just want the same thing in life as we do. And the two people I met treated me in very different ways, but they still had a great impact on me. Number one, I was in Joburg getting drunk, and I mean like big time drunk, because I was very confused, and my solution was, well, get drunk. So as I was drunk, I headed downtown. We were walking to a bar, and we got mugged on the way. Now, I had like a swastika fetish. Every piece of clothing I owned had a swastika on it. Even my boxer shorts, you know, everything had a swastika on it. And as we were walking downtown, of course, I had my swastika t-shirt on. And we turned a corner because we got lost. So I was just listening for voices, trying to figure out where is the nearest bar. We turned the corner and I saw 6 or 7 black South Africans. And I was an asshole, I have to admit it. I was an asshole. I was a real asshole at the time. And I could recognize other assholes. And these guys were assholes. I could see it. And before I managed to turn, they pulled a gun. So that was the second time in 1 week where somebody pointed a gun at me. And I thought to myself, now this is my last minute, because these were criminals. You know, it doesn't have anything to do with skin color, but these were criminals. And if you do the stats in South Africa, you know that most murders are never solved. And in the bad years, as they call it, at the time in the 90s in Joburg, I think 90% of murders were unsolved. So, you know, I knew as soon as he pointed that gun at me that I was a dead man and they would never solve that crime, and back home people would just, okay, you know, nobody would care if I died, I thought to myself. Everything was going through my head. And I just told the man, I looked at him straight in the eyes and I said, I hope you don't shoot me because I would like to see the rest of your beautiful country. I gave him my money and I was always looking him in the eyes. And I was told later by expert that that was a smart thing to do, to actually talk to the guy and actually look him in the eyes, because that it's lesser chance that he will actually shoot you. I didn't know that at the time. It was just a reaction I had. He didn't shoot me. Of course, I have to add that my view on Africans, black Africans, was not a positive view. I looked at African people as not being able to get an education, not being able to feel empathy. I looked at them as people who could not feel love. I looked at them as people who were not people, actually. They were just like animals with clothing. I couldn't relate to a black person as equal at all. My views on people of color was extremely hateful. This man, he didn't shoot me. And we went back to the hostel, the youth hostel. Of course, you know, maybe some of you have been backpackers. You know that the backpackers, they are not racists. They are very open-minded people. The only thing they do wrong in life is smoke weed. You know, they just travel and have fun. So me being a neo-Nazi in a youth hostel wasn't really a match. Nobody wanted to talk to me, and nobody wanted to do anything with me because I was a hater, you know. And then, of course, I kept on drinking, and I lost my wallet, and you didn't have the internet at the time. So I was stuck in Africa without money, being a neo-Nazi. So, of course, people weren't very sympathetic with me. But the owner of the hostel, she was sympathetic because she came from what she called Rhodesia, which was the former name of Zimbabwe. She used that name all the time. I'm Rhodesian, I'm not Zimbabwe, I'm from Rhodesia. So she told me that you can stay here for free, you can live here, but you need to pay when you get your money from Norway. And it had to go the old way, you know, with the international postal money ordering, which took like 10 days. It's not like Wi-Fi where it's done in 2 seconds. So I was stuck in Africa without money, and then I had the final, if I may, the final.
Let's be 3 minutes.
Yes, the final experience. I was in the bar at the hostel drinking water, which is not commonly, not a common thing I would do, but I didn't have any money. So I was watching rugby and drinking water for the 4th or 5th day. And I was very hungry because I didn't have food. I didn't have money. So, you know, it was not an easy situation. I had a roof over my head, but that's it. And then I was sitting there, you know, watching rugby and the Transvaal Sharks. I got to become a fan of them because I was watching that much rugby. And suddenly somebody said 2 lager, you know, 2 beers. And that was not like a strange thing to hear, but the beer came in front of me. And I thought, wow, somebody's buying me a beer. So I turned around and I looked at the guy, and he had the most friendly, disarming smile you could ever imagine. But he was black. And I looked at the guy and I thought to myself, my God, that man must be crazy. So I turned around like this and I showed him my swastika t-shirt. And he was still smiling and he was saying, cheers. And then it hit me. He is from the South African Intelligence Service. He is here to kill me. He has poisoned that bear. They finally came for me, you know. I thought that in my head. And I was like, oh, going all nuts there, sitting in my bar chair. And then the bartender, he knew me, you know. And he just did like this, Tom, relax. This gentleman just wants to buy you a beer. And I poured it, you know, so, okay, you know, and I was thirsty and hungry, so, you know, I had a beer. And we started drinking, me and him. And I woke up the next morning with a horrible hangover. And I remember, oh my God, I got drunk with a black man, you know. And for me, that was, you know, a shock because I couldn't relate to a black man at all. And I was thinking about this. I doing my daily walk around, and then I came back to the hostel. And he came around after work. He was a telecom operator from Zambia, doing work in South Africa in Joburg. And he had a bag of groceries. And he said, "Are you hungry?" And I had to say yes because I was extremely hungry. And then he said, "Well, if you want food, you have to help me make it. Zambian food." You know, and I can't explain how hard that was for me, but I went up to him, he gave me a knife, he gave me some vegetables, and he asked me to cut it up, and I did. And we had a meal, we had a few beers, we went to bed, and that's how the days went until I got my money from Norway. But 2 things happened during that time. The one thing was that I stopped shaving my head after 2 days. I let my hair grow. I have less hair today than I had then, but still I got a little bit of hair on my head. And I felt a bit embarrassed because this man was helping me, and he was black, and he was the only one helping me. And I needed his help, you know, to survive, actually. And so I turned my T-shirt, because as I mentioned, my swastika fetish, I only had clothing with swastikas on. So I felt, you know, I don't know what I felt. I was very confused, but I turned my tea inside out the last few days. And then suddenly I got my money from Norway. So I went to the hostel owner. I gave her the money and paid. And then I found him. He came back from work. I had 300 rand, which is roughly 50 euros. And I said, this is what I have. This is what I can give you. Thank you very much for your assistance. And he looked at me like he was very offended, and he said, I don't want your money. And I said, yes, you do. You know, I've been eating, I've been drinking on your bill. No, he said, I don't want your money. And I tried to like force him to take the money, and then he got really upset. And he said, you know, somebody told me that you were in serious trouble. I chose to help you as a fellow human being. I don't want your money because I helped you. And that's how the story ended. You know, he didn't accept my money, and he traveled off. I went to my family in Pretoria, and then I traveled back home to Norway, and I hit somebody with a baseball bat, and I got in jail again. The person survived and was not seriously hurt, but I spent 6 months in jail. For the first time in my life, I was alone in jail. No neo-Nazis were in jail. And the chef saw a movie called American History X. So he came one day for lunch, and he looked at me and he said, when you look at yourself and your lifestyle the past few years, what good has it done for yourself and your family? And that was the first time I actually sat down and I started thinking about my life, why I was in jail, what I've done, my experiences with the two very different black South Africans. One pulled a gun at me and the other one helped me. But if he shot me, the guy who mugged me, you know, he would confirm my thoughts about black people. So I was very confused because I thought to myself, if I were in his shoes, I don't dare to look at you now, I would have shot him, was my view. I would have shot him, you know. He was a black man. I hated black people, so of course I would shoot him if I got the possibility to do so. But I also knew that this guy probably grew up with the apartheid police. He must have experienced the white police officers of the apartheid regime. And still, with my swastika on my T-shirt, he chose not to shoot me. And that bothered me in a way, because it was wrong. He was an animal. He should have shot me, you know. And then you got the other guy from Zambia, and that totally confused me. Why did he help me? He was black, I was a Nazi. It doesn't add up at all, you know. He should beat me or threaten me or something like that. But he helped me. And I was in jail thinking about all these things. And then, of course, my priest from where I live, he came to see me. And he told me all the things that my family did not tell me. He told me about my grandfather's truck company that had existed for 60 years, was bankrupt because nobody wanted to do business with them because of the name, the shame that I brought on the family name, being who I was. So in his truck company, one of the last things he experienced in life was to go bankrupt because of me. And he was my grandfather, who I loved a lot. And then, of course, my sister, she was being bullied at school because of what I was doing. So all these things, nobody told me. My parents didn't want to tell me while I was in jail because they cared for me. So the priest told me. And all these things summed together, and I'm done now, made me think, I can't stand for this anymore. So I made a phone call back home and I said, I'm done with this. And when I was released 3 months later, even the jail administrator, and I did not walk around telling people that I was out, so I probably just acted in a different way. But the jail administrator, I met him actually 5 years ago with my father-in-law, which was a nice experience. He followed me out from the jail to my parents and wished me the best of luck because they could see that I probably changed somehow. And that's it. Yes. Yes. And I want to show this. If you know the term stormtrooper, you know Nazi stormtrooper. I'm a stormtrooper today, but I work with the 501st Legion, who do charity work. We have made over $22 million in 10 years to the Make-A-Wish Foundation in America. Okay, done.
Tom, thank you very much. I think your story was incredible, and it's extremely difficult to stop you because it's very, very, very interesting.
Yeah, and I just keep on talking.
But we have Bjørn here, and he will have very strong personal story as well. So Bjørn, please share from the different perspective, some kind of similar situation, but from different perspective.
Yeah, like how different this really is, kind of my question in many ways. Back in 2011, I was a member of the Labour Youth Party in Norway. I had been politically active for a few years, and one of my reasons for being politically active was that I grew up in a part of Oslo where people were from very diverse backgrounds. We had a lot of immigrants in my community. And I realized that people were being treated differently, that there are differences between people in terms of their opportunities and their abilities to make a living for themselves. And I realized that I was in a privileged position. I had parents who had a university degree and who were able to help me with homework, and just that made me be in a position where I was more able than many of my friends to take charge of my own life and make something for myself. And I realized that in the rest of the world, people have exactly the same issue. There's places in the world where people have less of an ability to lift themselves up, and I wanted to equalize that. I wanted to make it possible for everyone to have the same opportunities, and that's still very much the driving factor for everything I do. In that society as well, we had quite a lot of racism going on, kind of towards our community. In many ways, because I grew up in that community, I was being seen as one of the people were racist towards as well, because it was stigmatized living in that community rather than being an immigrant and such. In Oslo, things are very divided between West and East, and on the West side, all the rich white kids live, and on the East side, all the immigrants live. So there's kind of distinctions there. So I identified very much with my friends from all over the world, and started writing about racism, and wrote about racism for the papers and things like that from a fairly young age. It's kind of important to me to underline that, because in 2011, when I was a member of the Labour Youth Party and I started studying theatre in England, I survived a terrorist attack from neo-Nazi or far-right extremist, or whatever you want to call him. I was at the Labour Youth Summer Camp on the 22nd of July 2011, learning about the political situation in Western Sahara, a very different place from Norway, where it's very difficult to do politics. It's under occupation by Morocco, and occasionally shootings happen at their political meetings. I remember sitting there listening to a lecturer from Western Sahara, thinking that this is very far from my reality. It's very bad, but it's very, very different from Norway. Little did I know that hours later we would be in a very similar situation. After a meeting in Western Sahara, we were all gathered at the summer camp. We were about 500 people. We were gathered and told that there had been an explosion in Oslo. That was, well, we didn't know what the explosion was. There were rumors that it was a gas explosion or something like that, but Oslo doesn't really have a gas network, so that didn't make much sense. We found pictures from Oslo on our mobile phones, and it looked like downtown Baghdad in 2003. And I was kind of realizing that this had to be some sort of bomb. I was with the Oslo delegation, and a lot of us had people or parents and friends working in that area, so we started sharing our phones and calling or people. Luckily, no one we knew were hurt. We managed to get hold of everyone. My own parents were on vacation in the mountains. And as we were kind of organizing and things like that, we started hearing this popping sound in the distance. And at first I thought it was fireworks and that someone was kind of messing with us, trying to scare us. But then we were told to gather in the center of the island. The island is fairly small. You can walk around it in 10 minutes at like a regular pace. And we were told to gather in the middle, so I thought maybe someone on the other side of the lake was shooting at the island because he wouldn't be able to hit us there. And then a man in dark clothing came walking over a little hilltop, and some people were running towards him, and he shot them. He lifted his handgun and shot them straight down. And that was the first time I saw someone get shot, but also kind of when I realized that this was terribly dangerous in many ways. At the same time, I didn't really realize what was going on. It's an absurd situation. I ran into the woods with a friend of mine and called my father. He told me to stay down and stay hidden and not do anything stupid. So I kind of listened to his advice while not listening that much to his advice, actually. And my friend and I went down to, there's a track going around the island, and we picked up an 8-year-old boy who was sitting next to the track. His father was a security guard on the island, and he was just sitting there, and people were running past him, and we picked this kid up, and I hid with the little kid for about half an hour, and then the popping sounds came closer, and a crowd came running through the woods where we were hidden, and there was another little kid in that crowd, so I took the first little kid and joined the second little kid in that crowd, and we ran together along the track, and it struck me how incredibly quiet about 35 or so teenagers and kids could be while running, and we heard this like popping sound all the time, like never more than 2 minutes passed without there being a gunshot. And we ran along the track, and at one point we stumbled into what was a pile of dead bodies of friends of ours, and we had to leave the track. And I remember very distinctly in that kind of pile of dead bodies, it was about 10 people, was a cell phone with someone calling, and I realized that someone was trying to reach someone who would never be able to pick up the phone. Someone who loved someone on the island would never hear from that person again, and that really struck me. But we had to keep on moving, and we ended up on the southern tip of the island from where we could see land, where there was the longest line of police and ambulance cars ever. There was a helicopter in the air above us, and there were boats on the water. So we tried to signal the helicopter and the boats and tried to get them to come and help us. I lent my phone to the kids and told them to call their mothers, because both their fathers were supposedly security guards on the island, and if we called them, their hiding spots could be revealed. In reality, I knew that they were probably among the first people to get shot, which also was the case. After the kids had called their parents, I took the phone back and called my father again. As I was speaking to him, we heard some sounds behind us, and out of the woods came a man in a police uniform. He told us that they had caught the bad guy. And I told my father that they had caught the bad guy. And then he lifted his gun and started shooting at us. And that was Breivik. He tricked us by wearing a police uniform. We jumped into the water, and I lost the connection with my father. So the last thing he heard was that everything was okay. I started swimming outwards, but I was wearing a big woolen sweater, so I sank and stood up in the water and looked back towards land, and there was Breivik, and he took aim at me, and I realized that this was my last moment, and he fired, and he missed, and I fell over in the water, and within milliseconds realized that I had survived, while being kind of still confused because I thought I would be dead. But I decided to swim around the little tip of the island instead of straight outwards, because then we could hide. And the kids came along with me, and we hid underneath some bushes that hung over the water. And Breivik went back up onto the island and was captured by the police. So we've both been like at the wrong end of a neo-Nazi's gun, which is kind of funny in some ways, because we have different reasons for having been there. So that's kind of the story of how I survived. What kind of struck me afterwards was that Breivik was not so different from myself, and I think that's a very important thing to realize about extremists of all kinds, is that they are people. One of the things that make extremists do the things they do is because they don't have the same realization to some extent. As Tom said, he didn't see black people as people. We kind of lack that ability to humanize each other, if you like. And one of the things that happened in Norway after the attack was that we stopped seeing Breivik as a person. People started not wanting to mention his name. People started turning newspapers with his picture on around and kind of making him into something that he was not. If anyone's read Harry Potter, you know, kind of the term "he who shall not be named," and people started speaking about Breivik as "he who shall not be named," giving just the name a power to scare us in a way that he, first of all, didn't deserve, but also, secondly, a way that in many ways made us more similar to Breivik than what we should be. So the question then became, how do we prevent anyone becoming like Breivik? How do we make sure nothing similar ever happens again? And I started working towards that goal. My work had previously been on racism and kind of equal opportunities and things like that, but I realized that one of the key factors that make that difficult is or inabilities to recognize each other as human beings and giving each other as opportunities. So it's very kind of interconnected in many ways. A lot of policing efforts and things like that work on exit strategies and having people leave gangs and stop being neo-Nazis or jihadists or violent extremists of any kind. And I also realized that Breivik grew out of our society. He grew up in the suburbs of Oslo. He was young, he was white, he was very similar to myself in so many ways. And I could have ended up on a similar path, and so could countless others. So the question for me became, rather than how do we make people stop being neo-Nazis, how do we make people stop being jihadists, how do we make people stop being in motorcycle gangs, the question became, how do we make a society where people don't feel the need to join these violent groups or follow these violent ideologies? As I mentioned, I was studying theater at the time, and I had always been interested in film and theater and how kind of mass media affects people. And I was thinking of how I could use that to my advantage, and that was one of the reasons why I started studying theater. I was a propagandist. I wanted to be a propagandist at least, and I still want to be a propagandist. I started thinking about how the way in which films and mass media speaks about things affect us. And one of the concepts we have in Norway, and the lady from the embassy might be a little bit upset that I'm too critical of Norway sometimes, but one of the things that we do in Norway is we speak a lot about tolerance. And tolerance is dangerous, is my opinion. We tolerate immigration, is what we say in Norway. Well, I tolerate a headache. It's still a headache, and I dislike it deeply, but I tolerate it and I don't chop my head off. Building kind of this society based on tolerance, which is like a dislike, but something we accept, will for some people be intolerable, because the dislike will be stronger than our ability to live with it. So within kind of just our language, there are things like the word tolerance. There's also things like the word terrorist. How do we define terrorist? Breivik is spoken mostly about as a violent extremist. One of the reasons why Breivik is spoken mostly about as a violent extremist versus a terrorist is that he is white, probably. If he had been a jihadist, he would have been like straight out a terrorist right away. The same is true for shootings in the U.S. There was some friends of mine survived a shooting in Milwaukee in a Sikh temple in 2012, and the terrorist behind that, if you like, he was never spoken about as a terrorist. He was not even spoken about as a racist white supremacist. He was a member of a white supremacist organization, but he was a disturbed shooter in the media. So the way in which we speak about these things are kind of deeply unfair in many ways. So if we start speaking about each other as people and as having equal kind of levels of responsibility for what we do, and if we start speaking about each other as us versus us and them, we might be on a good way to creating a society where people can live in peace. And that can be done through various means. It can be done through working for democracies, like the organization that's hosting this does. And I'm now I live in Turkey now, and I'm looking into Syria, and I'm looking into Libya, and I'm looking at Turkey, and I'm thinking that there are things in those countries that are deeply disturbing, and things that are unfair, and that make people look at us and them as different. And that is true for the rest of the world as well. But how do we make a democratic society where people can live side by side and communicate and speak about their grievances rather than shooting each other because of their grievances, essentially? How do we build a society where we are we, and we are all individuals and we all have differences, but we also all recognize that we at least are human beings that deserve to be heard and not be killed? That's the questions I'm working on, and I'm gonna kind of cut it a little bit short there and answer questions rather than lecturing, because that's more fun.
Thank you very much, Bjørn. I would have a lot of questions, but because we are with the time where we are, I would really love to give the chance to all of you, or some of you, not all of you, that's not realistic actually, to some of you to ask some questions which you have. So if you have a question, please give me a signal and Katarina will reach to you. Okay, so we already have 2 people, and if there will be chance, I will be asking as well. So please introduce yourself and give your question or comment, please.
Daniel Milo, Ministry of Interior, Office of the Minister. I have a question to Tom. Your story was very interesting and heart-moving, if I may say so. But since I've been to many DRAT meetings and working groups at the European level discussing different strategies, how to actually pull people out of these groups, one of the major obstacles right now seems to be the generation gap. Many people are saying that the stories and the former combatants, such as you are, do not necessarily relate to the younger generation. Did you face similar difficulties when talking to young extremist teenagers? Do they relate to your stories? Do they say, okay, so this is something I've been through, and how successful you think the use of, I would say, former combatants or ex-members of those groups, such as you, could be used to actually pull people out of these groups?
Yeah, that's a big question in a way, but first of all, of course, things are different today than when I was an extremist. We didn't have a YouTube. You know, YouTube came around in 2007. I've been out of the movement for a decade when YouTube first came around. Facebook, Twitter, you know, Google, whatever, they're all being actively used by extremists today. My kind of YouTube, where Birth of a Nation or the movies that you spoke about earlier, the propaganda movies from the Nazi era, that we would have a tape recording of, and that would touch us in a way. You know, we're falling for the propaganda. But when it comes to the human relations, you know, the motivations today, in my study, I studied people who were neo-Nazis all the way up until now, 2011, and back to the early 70s. So it was a period of 22 years. And the reasons why people joined in the 70s were the same as why people joined in the 2011, even though you had YouTube and other channels that you could use as tools when you're an extremist to fool somebody into your movement. So I don't think that anything actually go out on date. It's just that it's different, but it's still the same. What we do know in Norway is that two things we know of that works 100%. One is a finding that I had no idea. When I was a neo-Nazi, I never met the police in an empowerment conversation, which is a method developed by Bjørn Ihler, which you know pretty well. Yes, he is the leader of the prevention division of the Oslo Police Department, and he developed this method called the empowerment conversation, which goes that if you're concerned about somebody, you talk to at least when they are under 18 of age, you talk to the person, you talk to the parents, you talk to them together, and you do research just like you do in like the Children Protective Services would do in a way. You map the family and you figure out what's wrong here, and you figure out a way to help them. And help the individual, and usually people turn it's like a drug user. I was a drug and alcohol counselor for many years, and you can't tell a drug user, oh, drugs is dangerous, you have to stop doing that. Of course the drug user knows. Nobody has seen more overdose than a drug user, so you don't get anywhere being moral to them. But if you talk to them and you interview them and you figure out why they became drug users, then you can actually start helping them. And it's the same way with extremists, I would say.
I think like a key element here is what you mentioned about empowerment, and I do a lot of research. I'm like in the middle of my master's studying this phenomenon. And empowerment is really kind of key, and giving people agency in their own lives. And Tom is pretty old. He's like in his 50s or something like that.
I just turned 40.
Yeah, I know. I'm just teasing you. Well, I'm 24, so...
I will be not saying anything.
So I kind of relate quite a lot with young kids who are joining various movements now. And a lot of kind of the sensation you get from people joining the movements is kind of a lack of agency or lack of trust in their own abilities to take charge of their own lives. So part of my technique, if you like, for giving or getting people out of movements is by giving agency, by kind of giving the ability to critically question what's going on and what the belief system is and whether that actually holds up. Like, for instance, there's a big kind of discourse in Europe right now and after 2008 about the financial crisis being a result of immigration, and all the European youth not having work is a result of the fact that immigrants are coming and stealing their jobs, and there's this whole kind of discourse on like they are stealing the jobs versus like we are not taking charge to take the jobs or get the jobs. And as Tom also mentioned, a lot of the people who end up in extremist movements are dropouts and kind of lack that kind of educational agency, if you like. So giving people the ability to see that maybe some of this is a result of your own decisions is a way of kind of getting them on the right step to come out of movements. Another thing I've been studying quite a lot is how things have shifted in the kind of era of social media. And this is especially relevant for jihadists, but also relevant for far-right extremists. And actually, far-right extremism has existed online for much longer in much more established networks than jihadism. So if you look at, for instance, stormfront.org, which is a massive far-right extremist social network, or a discussion forum, rather, you can see that kind of culture has developed there. And this culture has narratives about why the world functions the way it functions. If you can break into those cultures and start questioning why the culture thinks in the way it thinks, that is a way of de-radicalizing as well. I have some fake user accounts on Stormfront that has been doing this, and I know of former members of neo-Nazi movements who have still their accounts running in these social networks and helps people leave the movements every day. So it's become a new platform for recruitment, but it's also a platform for exiting and reaching out to the people who need help in exiting. And I think that's pretty important to underline. So a lot of people in kind of the counter-violent extremism world has a tendency to see social media as the enemy, as a platform for spreading propaganda. Yes, it's a platform for spreading propaganda, but we can also spread peaceful propaganda through it. And it's a way in which we can map who needs to be reached. So let's use it to our advantage rather than see it as a problem as such.
Yes, of course.
So you are mentioning actually two levels. One is the personal empowering conversation one-to-one with the people who might be a part of the movement already, and using the social media for broader, less personal impact on the right or extremists in any direction. But I would like to ask, when we are speaking about this personal empowerment conversation, who do you see should get involved with them? Who are the people? In what positions? How you get to them? Who are these people? I don't know.
Do you want that done?
Well, I can start it off at least. What has happened in Norway is that Bjørn, the other Bjørn, the police officer Bjørn, put a T, Bjørn is what my family calls him, because he was the police officer in my area of Oslo. He was the one who went out to schools and spoke to people. He has kind of developed this technique of involving the police and having the police kind of take charge of the de-radicalization, if you like. A lot of radicals are extremely skeptical to the police, understandably enough. They've committed crimes and don't necessarily want to end up in jail, which I understand. I've also been scared of being arrested by Bjørn for being mildly criminal. But, you know, what has been kind of done by Bjørn is communicating clearly that, you know, it is possible to leave these movements and you don't necessarily need to incriminate yourself in order to be able to do so. So opening that ability from the police side has been important, and kind of having a constructive dialogue between communities and the police. In many countries and many places, the police is kind of a mean of power from the government perspective rather than a mean of empowerment from the people perspective. In Oslo, this is about to change. The police is speaking to people on the ground and becoming kind of a mean of empowerment rather than a mean of control. While in Turkey, it's kind of the opposite. So it's interesting for me to observe these dynamics. I lived in Liverpool for a while, and Manchester is right next to Liverpool in England. And in Manchester, the police has kind of outreach working with people in protests. So building relationships between the people and the police in a constructive way rather than a destructive way is something that's important in this. While I also think there are other people who should speak to those who are in danger of being radicalized, I think teachers play a massively important role in seeing kind of the individual and adapting education to the people who need it the most. I think kind of adapted education is a big solution in keeping people in schools, keeping people in touch with people of different opinions than them. One of the things we kind of lack in the curriculums all over the world essentially is critical thinking. And I think if that kind of entered schools at a young level, essentially from like the first grade, then we would have a much bigger ability to deal with violent extremism. I also think like community leaders, priests, imams, rabbis, like not only religious leaders, but music teachers. I know I played the violin as a kid, and like a massively important role model in my life was my violin teacher, and I could discuss anything, not just music, with him. And I think that kind of role models is an important thing as well, and letting those people know that they are playing a role in de-radicalization, and letting them know that what they do is important in combating extremism is also important. Because right now a lot of people are combating extremism without knowing it, and they are highly efficient at doing it, but they could be even more efficient if they actually knew what role they were playing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Tom, would you like to react on that question?
Well, I could mention a few things, a couple of things. You also have to look at the victim side of things. And Bjørn Ihler, he was back in the day, as Bjørn here was saying, Bjørn and Bjørn, it's a lot of Bjørns here, but he was going to the schools at an early time. But if you look at two different situations, you had in the mid-90s, you had a murder called Holmlia-drapet, where the Holmlia killing, where a young colored boy named Benjamin was stabbed to death by a group of skinheads, neo-Nazis. And people reacted, you know, like in the hundreds of thousands, going in the streets, turning their back symbolically to hate and racism. But the stabber, the guy who killed him, if you went 2 years back, Googled him, you would find an article in our newspaper about a young boy who was at the subway being attacked by what they would call second-generation Pakistani youth. And he was beaten badly and robbed by these people. And Bjørn was the leader of the prevention division at the time. And he says honestly today that we didn't think of that at all. That we didn't think of the victims. He didn't call him. He said it was under his jurisdiction. They never called him. They never asked, how are you doing? Do you need help? Do you know? So he was in the media, getting his face all over the country and being a victim of crime, and nobody cared. You know, he never got any kind of help. And then you had the founders of Young Guns, which was and still is one of the main criminal second-generation Pakistani youth gangs in Norway. And the founders of Young Guns, they themselves, before they became Young Guns, were victims of crime at an earlier stage, but it was the same story. And they were working at a youth club, where, of course, because whites are the majority population, white people, a lot of white youth will go to that youth club. And some boys, white boys, they didn't like that the Pakistani youth were working there. So eventually a big gang of white guys, not neo-Nazis, but for sure racists, they attacked the youth club and they beat the crap out of these 4 guys. So these 4 guys were also under Bjørn Ihler's jurisdiction, And he says openly today, we never spoke to them when, you know, they were in the paper too with name and picture and everything, being telling their story, how they were attacked. Nobody called them, nobody gave them any assistance, nobody gave them any kind of help. So what happened was that they thought to themselves, if we're going to protect ourselves, we need to form a gang. And they formed a gang called Young Guns. And when you look a few years up the road, Young Guns were an active criminal narcotic dealing enterprise with murder on their conscience. So Bjørn asks the question, would he have become a killer if we had helped him at the early stage? Would these 4 people have formed the Young Guns gang if we had helped them at an early stage? So I think that's also an important thing to remember, that you also have to look at victims of crime and make sure that they get all the support and what they need. Yeah.
Thank you very much for mentioning this role, especially of police. It's very difficult to imagine in our conditions in Slovakia. So that's why I'm very happy that Daniel Milo is here from Ministry of Interior, and he will be speaking actually in the next panel. And also mentioning the role of the teachers. I'm very happy that in the afternoon we will have here Juraj Smatana, who is teaching actually at the school, trying to create critical thinking and working with these conspiration theories and different ways of influencing young people at the high school level. So we have some examples, but thank you very much for...
I might add, though, that Bjørn, just before I came here, I told him that I would give a little bit of information about the empowerment conversation. So he emailed me a PowerPoint which explains the empowerment conversation pretty good. So, of course, I can email that to you and you can forward it to anyone.
We can make a connection and it would be great. There was another question or comment, so please.
My name is Emil. I would like to ask Tom, you grew up in a good family, so what were your reasons to become a neo-Nazi?
Oh, wow. Well, okay, I'll be short.
Okay.
No, the whole thing is this, that as I mentioned, Tore Bjørgo, whenever he introduced me, he always called me the exception of the rule. That is true, but the thing is this, that a lot of things were happening in my hometown at the same time. I'll try to be very short here. You had a lot of refugees coming in from Kosovo, and they were living in this housing complex north of town. And this was before the internet, you know, so you couldn't Google anything. You only relied on the word of mouth. We had a youth club, and we got an argument with anybody from the outside. May they come from the neighboring municipality of Karmøy, we didn't like them. If they came from inside the fjord, we didn't like them. We didn't like anybody coming to our youth club. And then, of course, you got the Kosovo kids coming in, and we didn't like them either. And they even spoke in a different language, so we didn't want them at our youth club. And then at the same time, you had a party called People's Movement Against Immigration. It was a person called Arne Myrdal who was leading this movement. And even though they never got any representatives in parliament, when it comes to local school elections, they would win the school elections in my area. So when I started high school, we became a part of the whole group in school that was supporting Arne Myrdal. Because we were young, we were only like 7th grade, and it was cool to hang out with the 9th graders because they were the oldest at the school. And they all had these buttons saying Norway for Norwegians. And at the time, that was not prohibited by the school. So you got a bond there. And then, of course, you had the Blitz movement, which is an anarchist group in Oslo. They expanded to my hometown. They occupied a house, and they had a group called Syra, which means acid. Literally, they did drugs too, but they were also fascist group. And we didn't like them. And the reason why I was extremely anti-drugs was because I had a friend of mine who had a brother in jail. And when the brother was released, you know, he introduced my friend to drugs. And I could see how quickly my friend would deteriorate, you know, physically and mentally and everything, doing drugs. So I was very aggressive on drug dealers. And of course, we would get in fights during the weekends with all these different people. And then you had a neo-Nazi group in Karmøy, skinheads. They was also fighting this Blitz movement out of ideology reasons, while I was fighting them because they were pro-drugs. So my friends and I, we connected with the skinheads, helping them out, fighting the Blitz movement. And then they introduced us to their ideology, which I thought at the time was totally insane because I knew about all the crimes of the Nazis. Also, the Ku Klux Klan played a role because I was going to school, and the teacher had us watch a 3-hour-long STUM movie. He wanted to show us how the first cinema blockbuster came about. So he showed us a movie called Birth of a Nation, which was the very first blockbuster at movie theater. But of course, his intention was to show us the movie techniques, how you made a movie back in the day, while I was reading the message. The guy who made that movie was pro-Ku Klux Klan. He was romanticizing the Ku Klux Klan. And I thought, oh my God, those guys are cool. And meeting up with the Nazis, they had a magazine from the KKK. So I wrote them a letter. And they sent me a big parcel with stuff. And of course, my father went to the post office and he saw the parcel and it says from the KKK, and he got nuts, and I got like 14 days grounded. And then I thought to myself, okay, this is cool. So I wrote them again and I explained what happened, and I got a postal address at the post office so the parcel wouldn't be sent to my home, so my father wouldn't figure out. So then I was too young to be a member of the Ku Klux Klan, but they introduced me to KK Kids, which is the children organization. So I got like a mentor who would teach me the ideology of the KKK until I became 18. So yeah, long story short.
Yeah.
Work.
Try.
Yeah, I tried like switching it off.
Okay, so let's try another one. Because of the translation for some people.
Hi. No, you can translate as well. Yay. No, I think a key element in Tom's story and in all other stories is the sense of finding somewhere to belong. Tom mentioned kind of we quite a lot, speaking about him and his friends as kids. He spoke about 9th graders and kind of they were the cool kids, right? So they wanted to end with the cool kids, and then it was like the neo-Nazi group and the mentorship aspect of that. And that's something you find in all radicalization stories. Like Tom says, there are rules and there are exceptions from those rules, but so far I haven't found any exception to the rule that people want somewhere to belong, someone to belong with, and some sort of mentorship, father figure, whatever, call it whatever you want to. But there's always this element of finding a sense of belonging. So I just wanted to underline that. And
I want to add one thing. We didn't have the internet, you know. I was in high school in 1987 and 88, so it's a long time ago. And at my history class, at the same time as everything else was happening, I was reading about, they mentioned Dresden and the bombing of Dresden. And they mentioned that 70,000 people were killed in a firebombing of a city that didn't have any military targets. And then something happened in my head because I had a kind of fairness in my thoughts. You know, I was thinking, why didn't anybody get charged for war crimes for bombing Dresden? So I put up my hand to my history teacher and I said, how come that nobody were charged for war crimes? And this was back in the 80s. You didn't have any books written about, Gulag and Berlin and all these books that also show and gives a face to the suffering of the German people during World War II. It was only one story presented in school. And I asked my teacher, why weren't anybody charged for war crimes? And I ended up at the principal's office. And I said, what happened now? So I ran away from school, and I started skipping school, not because I was bullied or anything, but because I went to the library. And I went to the library, and I was looking through books, history books, and I was trying to find books that would give me an idea of the German people's suffering, because the reaction I got at school provoked me to figure this out. And I thought, I'm finding something here that they don't want me to know. So I was digging through the books, and I found books, a few books that would describe the suffering of the German people. And I ended up in like a radicalization tunnel with this kind of wisdom, because I was reading this and I wasn't learning this at school at all. And I thought to myself, this is information that is important. So I buried myself in the suffering of the German people instead of looking at the whole picture.
So again, referring to this one stopped working as well. Are there no microphones with
You want this one?
Does the translation work even if I speak like, oh, hi?
It just... okay.
Yeah. Now, again, trying to kind of generalize based on what Tom is saying, a lot of people get radicalized because they are thinking critically, actually, but thinking critically in a destructive way, if you like, just kind of reading into a different story than what mainstream society reads into a story. And I think it's important to see both sides. And in the case of Nazi Germany, it becomes more and more mainstream to see both sides, and at least in Norway and such, to kind of see that there was suffering on both sides. There are kind of great films that show this, like Der Untergang is a good one, but also The Book Thief and things like that, that kind of show that, hey, there were people, the Nazis were people too, and it's again about kind of building that they are people too relationship. But also, I just wanted to point out that people go to fight for ISIS, and they do it for humanitarian reasons. They do it because they see the Syrian people are suffering. They do it to support the refugees. They do it to support those suffering under Assad's regime. And ISIS is very good at presenting itself as an organization supporting Muslims and supporting the people of Syria. And I think it's important to kind of underline that the same is kind of true for Tom's story about how he saw the people of Dresden. We always want to help, and we always have a tendency to victimize ourselves and or brothers or those we see as kind of part of our group, in opposition towards another group. So in the process of victimizing ourselves, it's easy to dehumanize the other and say, hey, these people are monsters. They killed our brothers, so we need to kill them. And that's essentially the basics of quite a lot of radical thinking.
Thank you very much. We are not able to exhaust this topic because there are so many different aspects which you already opened, and we can continue on that. And I have this very bad position to close up this session. So I would like to thank you very much. Thank you for sharing, Tom. Thank you for sharing, Bjørn. And I'm sure that many of the people who are here would like to contact with you and continue with this discussion on the individual organizational connections.
Yeah.
So if you agree, we will share your contacts with our participants, and they will contact you. Thank you very much for bringing your stories and bringing your knowledge.